All right, let's just jump right into it. The capture of a sitting head of state, Nicolás Maduro, from inside his own fortified palace. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a movie script. It was just way too fast, way too clean, and it left the entire world asking one giant question. How on earth did they pull this off?
Now, really, just stop and think about that for a second. This is not your average political takedown. On paper, this should be a military impossibility. You're talking about grabbing a leader who's surrounded by his own army, his own intelligence services, not to mention a whole crew of elite foreign bodyguards. The fact that this operation was so flawless, well, that right there is the central mystery we're going to try and unpack. So, look at this timeline. The speed is just insane. In 22 minutes, less time than it takes to watch a sitcom, the whole thing was over. The presidential guard, neutralized. Maduro, in custody. And here's the kicker, the detail that makes you go, wait, what? 0 American casualties. An operation that perfect doesn't just raise questions, it practically screams that there's more to the story.
So, what was the official story? How did the U.S. justify this? Well, they claimed Maduro wasn't really a president at all, but the kingpin of a massive narco-terrorist group they called the Cartel of the Suns, or the Cartel de los Soles. This was the public and legal reason for the entire operation.
But here's our first big plot twist. After everything went down, the U.S. Department of Justice basically walked back the whole claim. They quietly admitted the cartel wasn't a real structured thing like you might imagine. They called it, get this, a metaphorical term for a corrupt system. So the very foundation for this massive military action, it started to crumble almost as soon as the dust settled. The mystery just got a whole lot deeper.
And that brings us right back to that central puzzle, a perfect, flawless mission that was built on a shaky, maybe even metaphorical premise. The details of the raid itself, they suggest this wasn't just a simple case of brilliant military planning. Something else was going on behind the curtain. Okay, let's break down the suspicious facts here, because this is where it gets really interesting. First, check out who the targets were. Very few Venezuelan soldiers were actually harmed. Instead, the focus was on Maduro's elite Cuban guards. Second, what about those advanced Russian air defense systems Venezuela has? They stayed completely silent, not a peep. And finally, the aftermath. The transfer of power was instantaneous and weirdly smooth. When you put all these pieces together, it doesn't look like a surprise attack. It looks like someone left the door open.
Yeah, all of this evidence starts to point towards a really explosive theory, that this wasn't a straightforward military victory. It was an inside job, a betrayal that was planned and executed from the absolute highest level of Maduro's own government.
And look, this isn't just some wild conspiracy theory. In a really strange move, U.S. intelligence sources started leaking to the press almost right away. They confirmed that a high-level asset, a spy, right there in the palace, was the key to the whole operation's success. Think about that. They weren't trying to hide the betrayal, it's almost like they were advertising.
So if there was a spy, who was it? Well, multiple reports and analyses pretty quickly started pointing the finger at one person, Maduro's own Vice President, Delcy Rodríguez, the very same woman who would take power the second he was gone.
So the case against her really starts to build around these 2 trips she took to Qatar. The first one, back in April, seems pretty standard, just a normal diplomatic visit. But look at the second trip, in October. This one is key because it happened after the U.S. military had already moved its forces into position right off the coast of Venezuela. And it's during this second trip that sources allege she secretly met with U.S. intelligence.
In fact, one analyst put it about as bluntly as you possibly can. The claim was that her trips to Qatar weren't about oil or diplomacy at all. They were, for all intents and purposes, an interview with the CIA, a test to see if she was the right partner for them.
And if you need more evidence, just look at what she was saying in public. Right before the capture, she's giving these fiery anti-American speeches, yelling that no foreign agents run Venezuela. Then, less than 48 hours after Maduro is gone, her tune completely changes. It's all about cooperation, about turning Venezuela into the energy power of the Americas, working with the U.S. I mean, talk about whiplash. It's a stunning reversal.
This casualty data really gets to the heart of the whole betrayal theory. Just look at the numbers. Out of the 40 people who died, 32 of them were the Cuban guards, the guys who were most loyal to Maduro personally. Only 8 were Venezuelan. It's clear this operation was surgically designed to take out the foreign loyalists while leaving the local military mostly untouched. That strongly suggests a deal was made to make sure they just stand aside.
But hang on,
What if we're looking at this whole thing the wrong way? What if this wasn't some simple story about a traitor selling out her boss? There's another really compelling theory, one that reframes the whole event not as a conspiracy, but as a brutal, logical consolidation of power.
To get this, we have to understand what real power looks like inside a state that's constantly under siege. It's not about who has the fancy title or who gives the best speeches. It's about who is actually managing the crisis day to day, who's absorbing all the pressure, and who's making the tough calls to ensure the state itself survives. In that kind of pressure cooker, power just naturally flows to the most effective people.
You know, as the political scientist John Mearsheimer points out, relentless sanctions can have this weird paradoxical effect. You'd think they'd weaken a regime, but sometimes they actually make it harder, more resilient. They end up empowering the most ruthless, most disciplined people inside it, the exact people who are best equipped to run a state that's in a permanent state of crisis.
So let's walk through this process. You could call it the sanctions filter. Step 1, the U.S. hits Venezuela with intense sanctions, isolating it. Step 2, to survive, the state has to centralize all its power. Step 3, in this new reality, it's the most loyal and ruthless operators, people like Rodriguez, who rise to the top. And finally, Step 4, real, actual control of the state shifts away from the symbolic leader, Maduro, and into the hands of the crisis manager, Rodriguez.
So the takeaway from this theory is huge. It suggests Delcy Rodríguez wasn't betraying the system at all. She was the system. Her actions, getting rid of a now ineffective leader to work with the U.S., weren't treason. It was the final logical step in taking full control to ensure the survival of the Venezuelan state itself, with her now at the top. She was the ultimate survivor.
Okay, now let's zoom out for a second, because this whole thing was never just about Venezuela. The capture of Maduro was a major move on a much, much bigger geopolitical chessboard, one that involved all the world's superpowers. The bigger context here is the Trump administration's decision to bring back the Monroe Doctrine. That's a really old U.S. policy from the 1800s that basically says the Americas are America's backyard. From that perspective, having rivals like Russia or China hanging around and having influence is seen as a direct threat that has to be dealt with.
And this cable here really shows how the other big players fit in. According to testimony from Fiona Hill, who used to be on the National Security Council, Russia might have basically told the U.S., you can have Venezuela, in exchange for the U.S. looking the other way in Ukraine. For Russia, protecting their money and their assets was way more important than protecting Maduro himself. And the biggest loser in all of this, China. They were buying almost all of Venezuela's oil, and suddenly they got completely shut out.
And while all these theories are swirling around, Maduro himself tried to reframe his entire situation. Standing trial in an American courtroom, he completely rejected the idea that he was just some common criminal. His plea was powerful and defiant. I am not a criminal. I am a prisoner of war. He was trying to cast this whole thing as a conflict between nations, not a simple arrest.
So what really happened here? Was it a deep state betrayal by a power-hungry deputy? Was it the natural consolidation of power within a state that's been hardened by sanctions? Or was it just one cold-blooded move in a bigger deal between superpowers? You know, the truth is probably some messy combination of all three. The only thing that seems certain is that in moments of real crisis, power is almost never where the official titles and constitutions say it is. It's in the hands of whoever can keep the machine running.